All right, so this is going to be episode 2 of team profiles for set G. This one is going to be about Baxcalibur. And so I wanted to do this team because I wanted to explore different options of out in terrain, right, that haven't really been explored, right? So generally, the consensus is that, you should be playing something with Ice Spinner or play something like Rillaboom or Indeedee to counter Pokemon like Miraidon. And so those are all well and good, but there's more options besides that. And so that's kind of the angle I'm going for this video. All right, so this is going to be a Excalibur team, and it's going to be the restricted is going to be Necrozma, right? So this isn't necessarily a set in stone combo. This is more of a variation to playing Baxcalibur as opposed to playing it with something like, like a Tailwind or with Snow, right? So, if you watch my VGC introduction video, I discussed um, the four types of, the four categories of Pokemon and how, if you've seen that video, you saw that Baxcalibur fell under the category of meta Pokemon, right? So Baxcalibur is not a Pokemon where its identity is really set in stone, right? It's a pseudo legendary, right? So that means it has 600 base stat total, but it's not a legendary. And it's also an ice type Pokemon, right? And in previous generations, ice was just another version of sand, pretty much. So it didn't really have its own identity, exclusive to sand. Um, but in Generation 9, they introduced snow as opposed to sand. I mean, as opposed to hail, and gave hail its own identity. Where being a, you know, instead of being a sand clone, it's now its own thing, right? So with that, they also introduced, not very coincidentally, Baxcalibur as the pseudo legendary, right? Definitely because they wanted to um, support the Snow archetype with the pseudo legendary from the game, right? So yeah, right. So this is uh, a variation of Excalibur with the Necrozma restricted. So Excalibur is a mid-range Pokemon. If you watched my video about a Dragon Hole, I discussed mid-range meta Pokemon, and Excalibur is no different, right? Excalibur has very high stats across the board, except they're not like, extremely high in some areas and then extremely low in some areas, right? So that's what makes it mid range, right? And so, as such, pairing it with another mid range Pokemon like Dawn Wings Necrozma gives it a very good core to build around, right? So, in this format, um, you know, we're faced with a lot of devastated restricteds like Miraidon and Koraidon. And so, as such, you need, counters to that. And so, mainly Miraidon is the main one that you want to really go for as a counter because it has such a devastating board state that it can set up that you don't have, dedicated counters to it, then you just auto lose those matchups, right? And I find that that was happening to me a lot in the beginning of set G when we rotated out of set H. And um, I was seeing a lot of success with the team that I first started with that I went over in my first VGC video, but I found that I was auto losing to Dondozo. So I definitely knew that I had to, reassess kind of my approach to this format, because if I'm just auto losing something that I shouldn't be auto losing to, then you know it's definitely something. It's definitely a sign to adjust, right? And so yeah, um, the same thing goes with Maridon, right? It's something where it has very clear counters that shouldn't be ignored, basically, right? You shouldn't just be team building to play stall, or team building to you know get some sort of like checkmate scenario set up very quickly, right? You should be team building to basically not auto lose to things that you can have very clear counters to, right? Because this is not something like TCG where your deck is structured in a way that you're just gonna have bad matchups, right? You have the options to put a lot of support on your team to counter stuff that you wouldn't necessarily have a good matchup into otherwise, right? That's kind of the beauty of VGC as opposed to TCG, is that you have a lot of wiggle room, right? And as such, you should definitely lean more into that, right? So I covered that a lot in my introductory VGC video, so you should check that out. All right, so yeah, right. So Baxcalibur is mid range, right? And so pairing it with Necrozma, Dawn Wings Necrozma is very good. Right. So again, as I discussed in my High Dragon Hole video, mid-range Pokemon need Pokemon to compensate for their lack of stats in certain areas, right? So for Baxcalibur, right, Baxcalibur, this team, right, just at first glance, you'll notice that there's not weather set up like snow, for example, and there's not like a speed control option, right? And the reason is because, let's just take a look at this Baxcalibur, right? This Baxcalibur has skill shot, right? So this is loaded dice Baxcalibur, right? Nothing special. Um, so skill shot, what it does is, if the move succeeds, then you get speed gets increased by one, right? So it can set up a board state where Pokemon that you wouldn't necessarily have a good speed matchup into gets fixed, basically. Right? So that's the idea, right? And so, yeah, so this team doesn't have speed control option because of that, right? Because Excalibur basically does it by itself. So that gives you a lot of options in your um, core slots, basically, right? So this team carries, a male Indeedee, right? So male Indeedee with Psychic Surge. This one has White's Glasses, has Expanded Force, Helping Hand, Pepper Voice, and Dazzling Gleam, right? So it's a basically an option to basically set up knockouts for your mid-range Pokemon, basically. So it's sort of like a carry support in a way, right? As opposed to Indeedee, which is more of a utility support, right? This is more of a carry support, and so um, you're not gonna want to have very targeted attacks. You're basically just gonna want to basically get a lot of support for your mid range Pokemon, and so you want to just run spread moves, right? Um, and also it's not really fully spread moves, because if you know expanded force, you know that unless there's psychic terrain, this move is a single target move. So you have options for single target, even though you don't have a move like psychic, right? And uh, another way you can set up the single target expanded force is with the other core Pokemon, which is Halucha, right? This is Psychic Seed Halucha with some burden. Um, so basically, what this Halucha is trying to do is just it's another form of terrain control, right? So generally the way we control terrain in this format is with Ice Spinner, or just carrying a Pokemon with terrain, right? But those are not the only ways to control terrain, right? You also have something like Terraform Zero, for example. The Terraform Zero is very high maintenance, so it's not something that you can just abuse. And then you have Steel Roller. But the only Pokemon that gets Steel Roller in this format is Iron Treads, and then you have Defog, right? And Defog is hard because it doesn't do anything basically, right? All it does is it reduces accuracy, reduces evasiveness, right? And so it's hard to really play a combo that combos well with Defog. Not only that, um, it's a very expensive slot to put on your team, right? So kind of what I did is instead of just putting Defog on my team, decided to create a combo with Defog basically. So the idea is that you can lead something like Indeedee and Halucha, right? And then right, then you can basically go for a defog, and then you can switch into something like a Tinkaton, right? And then you can set up a board state where you have a Pokemon with a reduced evasiveness, right? And then you have Pokemon with very powerful attacks, but may not have full accuracy, right? Like Play Rough, right? And like Flying Press, right? So that's the idea, right? And then not only that, when the Pokemon come in, right? For example, Tinkaton, you've used Defog, and psychic terrain is removed, right? So not only can your opponent not use uh can't use a priority move, you've taken away the terrain on your turn so that you can use your priority moves, right? So it effectively takes slots away from your opponent's Pokemon, and so it's basically like giving yourself an edge, basically, right? So that's kind of the combo, right? So yeah. So for this team, yeah, we got the core of the team is Halucha, Indeedee, um, Necrozma, and Baxcalibur, right? And then for your pivots, you have Tinkaton and you have Palafin, right? So the reason why I put Palafin is because Palafin is another Pokemon again, right? Where um, it has very good priority moves, right? And so having the ability to, control terrain and control priority, control terrain and control the usage of priority is very powerful, especially with a Pokemon like Palafin, right? Where, Palafin is very susceptible to, control type attacks like, Spore, Fake Out, Protect, etc., right? So that's kind of the idea, right? So Palafin has struggled for the last few formats just due to the fact that a lot of teams carry a lot of control, and this team kind of nullifies all that control and gives Palafin a board that it can thrive on, right? So also, it's the fact that Palafin is a Pokemon that thrives off teams that can switch very well, and with a team that has a lot of good switching options like Indeedee, right? Um, Indeedee, Assault Vest Tinkaton, right? Necrozma with Prism Armor, right? Um, this team really supports Palafin very well, right? So that's kind of the idea of the Palafin, right? So yeah, we'll just go over the team, right? So the restricted is Necrozma, right? So this one is HP Special Attack, Modest Nature, and it has Photon Geyser, Moongeist Beam, Prismatic Laser, and Meteor Beam, right? Power so that you can use a Meteor Beam on one turn. And originally the Prismatic Laser was Future Sight, but I don't want to make this video about Future Sight. And also I realized that if I'm gonna lose a turn, right? Because Future Sight basically just makes you lose a turn, then I might as well be doing 160 base power special move, psychic move than 120, right? So that's kind of the idea of Prismatic Laser, right? So and this is basically like this was basically Necrozma to kind of give a history lesson. Dawn Wings Necrozma was basically Zacian before Zacian was Zacian, basically, right? That whole line of Pokemon, the Necrozma lines, they just had a bunch of very devastating attacks, right? And so, you know, they gave them very high base power, but with very specific conditions, right? In this case, being the recharge, right? And the move was designed basically so it could just one shot a Pokemon, basically, right? So that was basically what they were going for with the Necrozma lines, right? So this move seems just like perfectly overpowered. It's because it's designed to basically be that way, right? So yeah, I lean more into that design with this move set, right? With a bunch of very high base power um, stab moves, and then coverage move and meteor beam. So that's the angle for this Dawn Wings Necrozma. Right? Then you got Indeedee Male. This one's special attack speed, timid nature, um, has wise glasses, and has expanding force, helping hand, hyper voice, and dazzling gleam. Right. So again, carry support. You don't want to carry a move like protect because it's not supposed to be protecting itself. It's supposed to be supporting its team. Right. And then you got Halucha, attack speed, jolly nature, with unburden, and a psychic seed. And it has acrobatics, flying press, taunt, and defog. Right. So another carry support. Um. So yeah, you want to carry a lot of carry supports with Baxcalibur, since it has a lot of single target damage, right? And so the Baxcalibur, HP attack, has high horsepower, scale shot, icicle spear, and protect with a loaded dice, right? And so it's a lot of single target attacks with very devastating damage, and then you have the options to switch your attackers with the protect, right? And so the pivots, we have Tinkaton. This one is Adamant Nature, 252 attack, 132 HP, 124 special defense. Assault Vest, Steel Tera. I'll go over the Teras after this. Um, so yeah, it has Play Rough, Fake Out, Knockoff, Giga 10 Hammer. Nothing special here. Yeah, you can switch Knockoff for Fates. If you want to, set up board states for um Excalibur, right? But I feel like knockoffs just pretty probably more effective for moves like for items like Rocky Helmet, right? Especially if you're playing with like Baxcalibur. So yeah. Then the last pivot is Palafin. This one is Admin Nature, 252 attack, 132 HP, 124 special defense. Right. So Palafin is a wall breaker and has a very high beast stat total. Um, and so it's not gonna need to outspeed anything because generally how Palafin is designed is that it's supposed to be going toe to toe, right? It's not supposed to be, preventing your opponent from playing the game, right? So you're not gonna want speed stats into it. It's probably just better to put, defensive stats into it on top of having maxed out attack because it's a wall breaker, right? This one has Ice Punch, Wave Crash, Jet Punch, Post Combat, right? And it's Clear Amulet, right? So for the Terra types, so um, again, this team um, being a mid range team, you're not gonna want to have like cash all Terra moves to counter like specific matchups. You're gonna want to just have your Terras, complement your Pokemon very well, so that you get the most value out of your Terras rather than trying to cheese out specific matchups. And so for the Terra types, I went more for Terra types that complement them. So, for example, I have Indeedee. This one's supposed to be fairy. I haven't changed it yet. Um, yeah, this one's supposed to be fairy, right? Um, so you can have the boosted dazzling gleam. Um, this one psychic, so you have the two boosted psychic moves. This one is fighting, right? So you can take away the flying type, and you can also have the boosted acrobatics, right? If you played like Generation 5 VGC or singles or anything like that, you're very familiar with like flying gem acrobatics. Well, yeah. This is more for that Pokemon that was on. I think it was a Moga, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Also with like um, I think it was a Moga in Gen 5. Generally, people were using it on, and then in Gen 6, you're running it with thing, right? You're running it with uh Halusha, right? Um, yeah. So I misspoke. I meant Gen 6, VGC and double and singles. But yeah, right. So fighting type is just more for blind press. Acrobatics is generally just a coverage move, so you're not gonna want the flying tear, right? Um, and then Baxcalibur it's dragon, right? So generally your main damage and move is gonna be scale shot, and so yeah, to have a tear boosted gives you like options for one shots and stuff like that, and then you can take away your ice type in, so you can't get picked off by moves like Behemoth Blade or like any like wall breaking, fighting or steel type moves, right? Then for Tinkerton it's steel, right? So you want to be able to um power up a move like Gigaton Hammer, right? So Tinkerton, if you're familiar with Tinkerton stats, Tinkerton has very solid stats across the board, but um its attack is like 72 or 73 or something like that. And this is not because Tinkaton is not designed to be an attacking Pokemon. It's because Tinkaton has very high base power attacks, right? So play rough and Gigaton Hammer, right? And so to compensate for having high base power attacks and a very good typing, they lowered its attack and put all its other stats into other areas, basically, right? So to compensate for that, run Steel Terra. And then for Palafin is the only one on this team that doesn't really have a type in that complements its attacks, right? So it's Grass Terra because you're going to be taking a lot of hits, and so you want a defensive type in, right? So yeah, that's kind of the idea of the team, right? Like I said, there's a lot of stuff you can move around, like Ka for Faint, right? And yeah, if you feel like there's matchups that you want to win, you can configure the Terra types, in different ways and stuff like that, right? And yeah, yeah. So that's Gallibur. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.